Hi, it's Jim Walninsky from Altered Space Photo Tribe. It seems like there's a million ways to create black and white photographs in Photoshop. Everybody who does it has their own way, and a lot of people will tell you that their way is the only way, or that their way is really the right way. And I'm not going to tell you that. I am going to show you one of my favorite methods, but I will admit that I use a lot of different techniques and a lot of different methods to make black and white photographs, even the initial conversion. Which tool I use depends on my mood, and it depends on the photograph, and it depends on what it is that I'm trying to create. But what I'm going to show you now is kind of my fallback tool, the first line of black and white defense, if you will, and that's the gradient map adjustment layer. I am, however, going to combine that with another adjustment layer, the black and white adjustment layer. And that might sound confusing, just bear with me and you'll see what I mean. What we're going to do is we're going to go from this photograph to this photograph. We're going to do it really quickly. So let me get rid of this layer and let's just kind of jump in here and start from scratch. So the first thing I'll do is grab a black and white adjustment layer, and I'm not going to do anything to it. I'm just going to go right ahead and put a gradient map adjustment layer right on top of it. And your gradient may look the same as this. It may look different. It depends on what your foreground and background colors are, what colors you used last when you were working in Photoshop. If your gradient doesn't look right, all you need to do is click right here in this gradient bar and just select black white. And you get a nice black and white photograph. So let's turn this layer off. And you can see the difference between what the black and white adjustment layer gave us by default and what the gradient map adjustment layer gives us. So why are we using both? Because this black and white adjustment layer can still see the color from the background layer. That means that I can go into the black and white adjustment layer and I can adjust the colors. So I can bring my yellows up a little bit so I can get some of the nice texture from these stones and rocks in the foreground and bring out some of the texture from my trees. So I've probably got some greens in here too, not too much. And there's red in there, but I don't want to make that, that's in the foreground. I don't want to make that too bright. And there's probably not very much in the way of blue and magenta because it's a pretty overcast sky. For an initial black and white conversion, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go with that. So let's close this down for a second and just take a look at where we are. So really quickly, we've gone from this to this. I'm going to go back up into my adjustments palette and grab a curve, and I'm just going to darken the curve. So I'm starting to add some atmosphere to my photo now. Now my blacks are starting to get a little too black, so as I go, I like to protect my blacks. I'm just going to click on my black point here and touch my up arrow key a time or two. And you can see that my blacks start to lift. If I go too high, then I get that kind of flat matted effect, and that's not really what I want here. I just want to keep them from getting too dark on me. So that's pretty good. And I'm going to move this up above the gradient map where it belongs, and of course now it looks different. But that's not too bad. That looks pretty good. So, and I'm dragging this white point down because I want to maintain these relationships, these tonal relationships. If I leave this up here, I've got too much contrast, and I just want to pull that down just a little bit. So I'm going to take a big brush. Let's close this down. And I'm going to make sure that I'm painting with black. And I'm going to change my opacity to about 50%. And I just want to reveal the center part of this photo. So I'm going to click once over here and move over to the other side of the photo and hold down the shift key and click again. And I get that nice stripe across there. And I also want to reveal this bottom part here. So I'm going to try using the same brush size, and let's just click. And that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now I'm going to do something completely counterintuitive. I'm going to add a brightness and contrast adjustment, and I'm going to brighten this significantly. And I might add a little bit of contrast too. And the reason I'm brightening this is because I'm about to darken it. And you have more latitude darkening tones that you've already brightened than the other way around. It's hard to lighten tones that you've already darkened. So I'm going to do some really substantial darkening here. And I'm going to be better off with light tones. So at this point, I will make a stamp. And I'm going to go up into the filter menu, and I'm going to select blur, Gaussian blur. And I'm going to blur this about, 30 pixels. Maybe not even that much. That's a little too much. Let's try 22. That's good. And I'm going to go over here and change my blend mode to multiply. So now everything gets really dark. I'm going to back that off a little bit. And it's obviously too dark, but we're getting that kind of moody look that we're after now. So I want to protect my highlights. I don't want my highlights to get this blur so much. So I'm going to double click on this area right over here, this gray area in my layer, and bring up the layer style dialog box. And I'll use blend if to bring back some of these highlights. So let's just grab this slider here, and you can see what happens if I go. And we want that to feather out nicely. And that's perfect. So that's our before, and that's our after. Now it's looking like my blacks are getting a little buried again. So I want to bring those up. And I'm just going to do that by grabbing a curve here. And I'm going to lock this quarter tone down right where it's at, because I don't want anything above there to move. Just the black. So I'll click here, and I'm just going to have to tap a couple of times to bring my blacks up. So again, if I go too far, then I get that matte effect, and that's not really what I want. I just want to make sure that my blacks aren't buried. And that looks really perfect. So let's start to play with our sky a little bit. I'm going to add another curve here. And I'm just going to pull this down. Just like that. I don't really need to worry about the tonal relationship here because I actually want the contrast. But what I am going to do is invert this mask. And I'm going to grab my gradient tool. And I'm going to paint with a foreground to transparent gradient using a linear gradient. And I want to be painting with white because I want to reveal the adjustment that's underneath this black mask. So I'm going to switch my foreground color to white. And I'm doing this at 100%. So I'm going to start right about here and hold down the shift key to constrain this to vertical and just drag to about there. That's great. That's exactly what I want. I've got nice drama in my sky now. So what I want to do is select this mask and paint back some of these highlights in the sky so it doesn't look so vignette-y. So I'm going to grab my Wacom pen here and switch over to the brush tool and reduce the size of the brush tool. And I want to make sure that I'm painting with a brush that's sensitive to pressure and that the opacity will change depending on how much pressure I add to my brush. And I'm going to paint with black because I want to paint some of this darkening effect out. And I'm going to do it at a really light opacity. I'm going to do it at like 10%, just a little bit at a time. Really light touch. So I just want to bring some of this stuff back. And you can see that I am using a very light touch. But when I turn this mask on and off, you're going to see the difference. Sometimes I'm going to need to reduce the size of my brush a little bit. And again, I'm going to say that, you want to use the biggest brush you can get away with. Big brush strokes are hard to see. So I want that revealed like that. So if I turn my mask on, and let's just step through the history palette actually, and just go up above my brush strokes here if I can. And you can see the effect of my brush strokes. So all we really need now is a nice vignette and some tone control. I'm going to grab my lasso tool and make a nice organic shape, because organic shapes don't look so vignette-y, and I hate it when vignettes look like vignettes. Let's make a curves adjustment layer, and Photoshop will create a mask based on our selection. Now we want to darken the outer edges of the photo And that means that my mask is backwards. So I need to invert that, Controller Command I. And I'm going back up into the filter menu, blur, Gaussian blur, and I want about 400 pixels this time. So I'll click OK and grab my curve and just drag it down. Now my blacks are starting to get a little out of hand again, so I'm going to click on my black point here and just tick, 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 go up a few times until those blacks start to come back. Now what I want to do is I want to bring back some of the darker spots in this photo because I don't want it so dark uniformly everywhere. So I want to paint with black, and I'm going to grab my brush tool and we're going to paint with 20%. That's pretty good. I'm going to make my brush kind of big because I want to bring back this area here because that's what's leading me into the photo, right? And so we'll ease up on this corner a little bit, and I'm going to bring back some of my highlights again using a really light touch on this brush. Let's make this a little smaller. Just come in here a little bit. And a little bigger, just to blend that in. And we'll bring back some of this, and maybe some of this shadow, a little bit of that. And there you have it. So really quickly, we went from this to this. The gradient map adjustment layer is your friend. It is an awesome tool for creating black and white images. So practice using it, and I'd love to see what you're doing. So post some of your images on the Photo Tribe Facebook page. The link is below. And if you like what you see, subscribe to the channel. This is Jim Welninski from the Photo Tribe. Be creative, have fun, and I'll see you next time.